to the drama, because we can get right into it because there's a lot to get to. As usual with Red Bull, you have internal fighting to start the weekend off. And it has to do with a celebration of 20 years of Red Bull in which Jos Verstappen was supposed to drop into the RB8, I believe.
Yep.
We did talk about this on Thursday, but I think it's important context regardless. And obviously be a part of a parade and show that off. And apparently Christian Horner didn't want him to, this is according to Jos Verstappen, who's, I'll be honest with you, relationship with the truth for me is, questionable at best most of the time. He said that Christian didn't want him in the car and that he wished that Christian had just come and said it to his face. And Max, obviously, because it's his dad, said the situation was unnecessary and they didn't need it to happen. And in that respect, Max is absolutely right, because this is a race weekend. It's Red Bull's home race. They need to win this race. This is an important race. And the Dutch fans, or at least the Orange fans, always show up massively at the Red Bull Ring. And they could have won it, but they didn't win it. And it's not because of Jos and Christian. That was just a sideshow. They didn't win it because, Tim, why? Because I think it's important we get a race car driver's perspective. Everybody saw the corner. Everybody saw Max and Lando bump into each other. Both sustained punctures. Lando out of the race. Max 10-second penalty. What do you think?
Before I start, Adam, is there anything you need to get off of your chest?
I'm waiting.
First?
I'm waiting until you're done. I'm waiting until you're done because I think we need the rational perspective,
okay.
And then we can get the. Because honestly, Tim, I think
sure
it's
you don't want to just launch into the respectable fan reaction.
I've had a couple hours to cool down, and here's what I want.
All right.
I want to hear it straight, so I can either be more or less mad about it, but at least I'll feel justified. Does that make sense?
Total sense. Okay.
All right.
Actually, this would be pretty good if you're watching us at home or listening. You pull up the you can find a feed of the entire race. Go to lap 55. So that's when Norris makes his first attempt on Verstappen, and you can. I mean, it's blatantly obvious he moved in the braking zone. I don't care what anybody says. He's moving in the braking zone, and he did. So for Lando as a driver, when you have something like that happen to you, it takes away, I guess, your trust level with who you're racing with, because you don't have that trust that they're going to race you fairly, like you're going to be given enough room to either pull a pass off or an attempt at a pass. So for Lando, I think that's it's already shaken him a bit from there on out. My problem with that part is the stewards not getting involved immediately. There is a moving in the braking zone, and I'm sure everybody heard this, penalty that literally exists because of Max Verstappen. And in the past, when he moves in the braking zone, because he used to do it a lot, and it pissed a lot of drivers off. So there literally is a rule for that because of Max. And he definitely moved in the braking zone there. There's no question about that. So the steward's not at least noting it, I think is an issue. I think when you note something like that or you put it under review, your drivers and your team you're going to get notified, right? They're going to say like, hey, you guys are under investigation. Max moving in the braking zone. Lando gets notified. So it sort of lowers that temperature a bit at him. You know what I mean? Like it just takes it down just a little bit. And it allows Lando to feel a little more, I guess, not comfortable, but a little more confident in trying to attempt something the next time because Max may not do it again.
Right.
But with that, Adam, let's say, since we didn't get a noting or a review or an investigation, I should say, Lando has a couple more attempts at this thing, but by the time you get to lap 63, he has another attempt at it. But this time when he's heading into turn 3, he bolts off from behind Max, and as the two of them are heading up to turn 3, you can see that Lando has given him a lot of space in between the two of them. And here's what I would have done in that moment, because Max has already set the precedent. He's set the precedent that he's going to move in the braking zone, right? He's also the championship leader. He can lose points. He hasn't won the championship yet. This championship is still alive, and we have a lot of races to go, so he can lose points. If I'm Lando Norris, I'm not giving him that berth of space in between the two drivers. I'm coming over, and we're going to go wheel to wheel through this thing.
Sure.
And I know you have to leave. I know you got to leave some space. You always got to leave the space. But Max has already set the precedent. And now I'm going to set my own. And that's going to fix that'll fix the entire thing for both drivers. Because what that moment says is that I'm going to put my car here. And if you're going to move over on me when you're braking, we're going to have a collision. So I'm going to leave it up to you to make that choice of whether or not we have an incident here or not. Just park your car there and see what transpires, right? And so from that moment moving forward, you've drawn a line in the sand saying, look, I've had enough with your moving in the braking zone, and this is what I'm going to do. And if you don't like it, too bad. You were already doing something that I found was totally unfair. So now I'm going to do something that's totally unfair. And at that moment, the stewards should definitely stay out of it because they didn't get involved with it back on lap 55. So you should be good to go with doing something like that. And if not, then you can go and argue it after the race as a team.
Right.
And then in that moment, Adam, I don't think you get what happens later. You don't get the two of them touching. Because Max isn't going to move in the braking zone anymore.
Right.
And he did. He did move in the braking zone.
So,
and they had a collision.
Your conclusion is?
Max is, in my opinion, Max is totally at fault in this. And I'm shocked that he didn't take responsibility for it. And I am interested to see what happens between these two drivers moving forward, because there's a little more I want to get into on that after I hear what you think, Adam Wilde, about what transpired.
Well, okay. From my perspective, the best piece of evidence I had, other than my eyeballs and my unprofessional opinion, was the reaction of the three podium drivers when they saw it in that little area where they kind of the cooling off room before they go to the podium.
Room. Yeah.
The cool down room. So you got Sainz in there, you've got Piastri in there, and you got George Russell in there. And when they see the overhead shot of what happens with Max and with Lando, when Lando gets the puncture and Max gets the puncture, they all start laughing as though they know. And then George goes, "Oh, mate."
Yeah.
Like he knows, and he said something, and I think Piastri turned to him and he said, "Well, that just won you the race," and and I think that's funny, right? Like that drama it's very funny. It was very Aussie humor of him and that sort of thing, and I like that. But what I'm saying here, Tim, is to me the only people that could defend this really are people that are Max Verstappen, dyed in the wool, can't speak any sort of rationality to them people. And that's fine. If you're one of those people and you think that Max is downtrodden and you think that he hasn't always dive bombed people and done all the things that he's accused other people of, and you look at the way he raised Lewis in 2021, if you think that every driver on the grid at one point or another has said that was BS to Max, right? Every single one of those guys who have actually raced him when the cars were a little bit more equal than the last couple of years, they've all accused him of the same thing. At a certain point, it's you. A guy like Esteban Ocon gets accused of a lot of stuff, and deservedly so. Esteban is a great driver. He's never been in a great car. Never really had a great car. That guy, everybody kind of universally accepts, Esteban's a bit of a wild card. He dive bombs people. Look what he did to Gasly in Monaco. Look at this. Look at that. Even Max, and him almost, punched each other out once after a race. Yeah, and what's interesting about that, Tim, is that everybody accepts that about Esteban and they still respect his driving skills. With Max, there seems to be this extreme defensive when it comes to criticizing this driver, who, by the way, has always been this way. And what's noticeable is it's come mostly after 2021, because a lot of people, myself included, believe that the rules were improperly applied, and Max won, and I don't doubt his legitimacy as a champion, but the stewards, Michael Massey specifically, improperly applied those rules, and he won a championship that he probably should not have won, if all things were being equal, right? And that's my opinion. But because of that event, I find Verstappen fans to be extraordinarily intense, ferocious in their defense of this guy. And they're mimicking Red Bull, which have been decidedly the same. What's interesting to me, though, is that Red Bull isn't doing it the same way anymore. Last year at this time, if this had happened, Tim, Christian Horner would have been on Instagram, on Sky Sports, on all these other places, ripping Lando Norris for whatever, because the whole thing is fire a bunch of arrows, deflect, 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 right? Not seeing that now. Christian saying about, it's not the result we wanted. And I feel like that's an interesting thing as well. So that's how I feel about this. I feel, as a fan, in the moment, I felt robbed a little bit because I wanted a good 1-2 battle for the last 8 races or eight laps. We haven't had one of those in years. And I think that Max, from an entertainment perspective, robbed us of that. And you know who was famous for doing stuff like this? Michael Schumacher. So I am not saying that Max isn't great. I'm not saying there isn't precedence, because if you go back and you watch Schumacher clips, there's a reason why people were Mika Hakkinen and died in the wool fans. Michael Schumacher did some terrible stuff on track, and he's a champion, and no one remembers any of that. And maybe that's the way we'll look at this. But as a race fan, I feel like we got robbed. As a McLaren fan, I know we got robbed. And I think the thing that stung me the most when I looked over at my wife was, I'm like, man, they were doing so well in the drivers' championship points, because that is, I think, McLaren's best shot at a championship this year. So that's my big, all-encompassing group of feelings. I don't know how relevant or true they would be, but that's how I feel about it.
Hey, you're entitled to your opinion and entitled to your feelings, man.
Do you think that they're lunatic, or are they okay? Like, are they inline-ish? Maybe.
Adam, I think I respect what Verstappen, has done in his career. I think he is generational talent. He's an incredible driver. That we got into a race situation where a team was under pressure that made mistakes that ended up snowballing on them, and the driver ended up making mistakes because of that. And then a driver behind was able to put pressure on him, and he made mistakes and questionable decisions, questionable defending, in my opinion. Lando was the faster driver on the final stint. That's just the way it is. I think that if Max hadn't been so aggressive in the braking zones, he may still would have had a chance at fighting for the win. That was a fight that was going to rage on, I think, until close to the end. That's just the way it is. And instead, both of them get taken out. I mean, Max able to limp back to the pits and
get some points,
carry on and get some points, extend his championship lead because of it. Red Bull also able to extend their lead in the Constructors' Championship as well. I think for when you take a look at these two drivers, they're friends off the track.
Yes.
And you cannot be friends if you're fighting for Grand Prix victories and championships unless you have set a precedent for what the two of you are going to allow and what the two of you are not going to allow. And that has to come down to having a conversation between two drivers. They need to sit down and they need to figure out their rules of conduct and their own rules of racing. What are they willing to accept and what are they not willing to accept? Where is the line and what is crossing the line? Because let me tell you something, if this continues the way it's going to continue, because Lando Norris isn't going anywhere. He's going to be in contention for race wins. Most likely he's going to be in contention for a race win next weekend at the British Grand Prix. This is not going to end. McLaren is here. They're going to be here for the rest of the season. We know that. If these two want to remain friends, by the end of this season, they are going to need to sit down and have a conversation on how they want to race each other. Because if they don't, Adam, that friendship is gone.
And Lando said as much. And it was interesting because he's like, listen, Max has got to take responsibility for this. Otherwise, I'm going to lose a lot of respect for him. Obviously, that's post-race and you're in your feelings a lot. How could you not be? Things are intense. Max said that Lando was doing a bunch of things that had been illegal. I mean, he did get a black and white flag, right? And he said, and he's expecting not to get penalized for it or whatever. They say what they say. It's interesting that you say that these two drivers need to sit down and have a conversation with each other, because the way we would look at it from the outside is, well, it's the FIA that's going to determine that. But actually, mutual respect between drivers racing for a championship is not unheard of. And so you say, sit down on the private jet.
You look at Hakkinen and Schumacher. You had mentioned Hakkinen and Schumacher earlier. We're going to reference them again. Those two would have a chat. Like, they literally would go and have a chat as to things that were acceptable, things that weren't. Mika would grab him and say, look, you did that. Like, I don't like it, like, when you're doing things like that. And he's like, next time you do something like that, this is what I'm going to do to you. And so these are the conversations that need to have happened. And that's why I had said earlier, with setting a precedent where you're Lando, you're going to park your car right there, and I'm going to leave it up to you whether or not we're going to have a collision. And if that's the way you want to race for the rest of the season, I'm going to set my precedent right now so you understand what we're doing.
Right.
Because I am not going to do this anymore. I don't like this. This is not fair racing. And that's the way I think Lando looks at it in terms of what's fair and what's not fair. He is a driver that does demand respectful racing, and I have no problem with that. But I also, Max he's ruthless, right? Like, well, there's a reason why he's a 3-time, potentially 4-time Formula One world champion. And at the end of the day, Adam, sometimes that's what you got to be to be that high up in Formula One. There's a difference between racing at the back. There's a difference between racing at the back, racing in the midfield, racing for a point, racing for points, racing for a third place, and racing for a victory. Right. There is a difference. If you're racing for a point, you got to keep the car alive. Like, you have to live to fight another day. You're racing for a race victory.
Max and Lewis didn't seem to be able to have that conversation. That might have come down to competitiveness. Could come down to maturity. One being much older, one being much younger. Could be a whole bunch of things. Do you think Max is at the level that he can have a conversation like that? Do you think Lando's at a level that he can have a conversation like that? Can they have this conversation and it be productive? I
think they can. Like, here's the thing. Like, I find after 2021, like, Max matured, like, a lot, and maybe wasn't put under as much pressure until now, compared to 2021 when he was put under a lot of pressure. Yeah. And now, again, that pressure is starting to come back and show itself again, and this time with a friend of his, right? And I think for Max, it's once you're on the track, there are no friends. And that's right. There are no friends when you're on the racetrack. There isn't.
Right.
Your guys you're not buddies, okay? But you have to find a way of racing each other fairly if you want to maintain a relationship outside of the racetrack. And that's, I think I would hope for Max, that's what he would want, right? I don't know, but I would hope that that's what both of them would want. Obviously, they both want to win. They're both competitors, and they should be, and they should want to kick each other's ass when they're on the racetrack. But off the racetrack, I mean, yeah, they've been friends for a very long time, so it would be a shame for them to lose that over something as silly as tactics within your driving. And, when you look at the stewards and what are they sometimes the drivers have to police themselves. That's all there is to it, right?
We'll see. Listen, I feel like Lando can have that conversation. I feel like he wants to. He basically told the press he wanted to today. You're right on the maturity with Max. I'm just not sure he's ever going to give that. And that might be the thing that makes him a champion. There is that little bit of being a champion that is absolutely ruthless. So I don't want to take anything away from him on that. The other thing that I think is a secondary story at Red Bull, which should be, I think, the bigger problem, and whether or not Max and Lando, had their dust up today, this would still be a massive problem. Helmut Marko was out in the press calling out Daniel Ricciardo last week. Ricciardo finished in the points in a previously spec'd car.
I want to go back on something real quick, Adam. I'm really sorry to the viewers and listeners because I just kind of popped into my head. I was just thinking about when Lando got his track limit violation.
Oh,
and
yes.
He had been hit with they hadn't issued the penalty within the moment, but he was put under investigation for obviously leaving the track limits too many times. I think that Red Bull needed to do a better job in that moment of relaying that information to Verstappen. I think that if they do that, then we may also get a different outcome from the way Max was also handling the situation. I think at that point, he probably would have let Lando go by and waited to see what the stewards had said, because it is a given that when you go over track limits too many times, you are automatically getting the 5-second time penalty. And I don't think Lando is going to be able to open up a 5-second gap over Verstappen if he got ahead. I mean, maybe he could have cranked out 3, maybe 4, but I don't necessarily think he would have been able to hit 5. But so that was just like another thing that actually just crossed my mind when we were talking about that battle between the two of them and how things may have changed or may have been a little bit different. And again, speaking to the maturity of Verstappen, where, if he had have gotten that message, I highly doubt that he fights Lando as hard as he does.
And do you think that Lando eventually would have passed him and won, or is there a different winner in mind that you have?
No, I think would have been a good battle between the two of them, but I think Norris comes away with the win for sure. Yeah.
Wow.
He was a faster driver on that final stint. He had more newer tires, right? Like Max didn't have anything left like that was newer. He had a couple tires that were a little older, but for Lando, he had fresh rubber, and I think he would have won this for sure. And that's the difference, right? That is the small little difference that we have been talking about for the past 3 months now.